Hey, what's up, dudes and dudettes? Brad the Guitarologist here, coming at you from my kitchen. I haven't posted too many videos of late, and I realized that. Been kind of lax on the posting front. I've had a little bit of a cold, and it's kind of still persisting. Also, but you know, couple weeks before that, I was dealing with the death of my grandmother. So you know, a lot's been going on the side in my personal life. I haven't been able to post quite as much, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this new Beatles documentary that is on Disney Plus. Now, I realize a lot of you, for various reasons, a lot of it having to do with, Disney siding up to communist Chinese and all that kind of stuff. I get it. A lot of you have commented on that stuff, and I've seen all the whispers about that too on the internet. And people boycotting Disney for all these various reasons. And there are valid reasons, I think, to want to stay away from giving Disney more of your money. But when you have two kids, that becomes a little bit more impossible because Disney does produce some valid works of art, I believe. And we could talk about all the things that I do like about Disney maybe in another video, but this is one of those bright spots as far as Disney goes. The new Disney Plus series on the Beatles, where they took... One moment, let me get some light. Might as well light it up, huh? So they took these 150 plus hours of footage that they made while they were recording tracks for their last couple of albums. They were writing and recording tracks for Let It Be. Mainly it was from Let It Be and Abbey Road stuff. And a spoiler alert here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's in this series, but by no means am I going to cover everything because, like I said, this is 9 hours long. It was directed by Peter Jackson, so Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. You've got 3 parts, just like Lord of the Rings. You've got a trilogy. And each of these parts is 3 hours in length, so 9 hours basically of stuff that's there. That to me is it lends the greatest insight into the creative process, at least for musicians, that I've ever seen. And it's so true in so many respects and so true to life. I think most musicians, anyone who's ever been in a band, can see reflections of themselves in this documentary. And it's kind of heartening because I think a lot of us have fears and we have issues, interpersonal issues within whatever groups that we're in, the bands. And we think to ourselves, well, these great bands that we aspire to be like, they must not have these sorts of problems. Well, this definitely shows where the Beatles, they did have their interpersonal problems, but, really for the bulk of this series, it's surprising how well they were all getting along, and it's almost like... when you come to the end of the series, you watch all 9 hours of this thing, you're wondering to yourself, you're seeing Ringo, kind of playfully messing around with Paul, and you see them all kind of jamming together, listening back to the tracks that they just created on the rooftop. It's amazing to me that they did end up going their separate ways, and didn't sit down and try to work these things out. And if you're not a Beatles fan, maybe you're not into this or whatever, but any Beatles fan, this is an absolute must-watch because it's, like I said, and even if you're not a Beatles fan, if you're just a musician, you're going to see so many mirrors upon yourself and the creative process that it's worth a watch. There's so many times when throughout this process that, Paul will be sitting at the piano, banging out, the first chords to Let It Be or whatever, and he might have like the first verse, and he's kind of going with the first verse, or he starts on to something else and then meanders into, something that's like, oh, Paul, like, that's a song that you haven't written yet, you need to go there, explore that, there's a great song right there, Paul. Or there's a great song right there with what you just started. And there's this one particular part, and you get to see all the interpersonal relationships between the 4 Beatles, and it's like you see who's the strongest relationship, who's the strongest member of the group. I think undoubtedly is Paul. Paul is absolutely the creative force behind that band. I think after watching that, it would be hard for anybody to deny that he was the creative genius really behind the Beatles. But the problem with Paul is, as with a lot of creative geniuses, is that they are slave drivers in a lot of respects to the other members of the group. So they become a little bit controlling without necessarily even meaning to. I think Paul, he had a lot of self-awareness when it came to that. I think he was aware of the fact that he was being controlling, and you could see him in a lot of sections of this trying to step that back and trying to create room for the others and lay off a little bit. But he knew what he wanted to happen. He had this vision in his head for whatever song they were working on, and it was not a fully formed vision by any stretch, but he knew how he wanted the rhythms to go roughly, and he was trying to convey these things to maybe Ringo here. And that brings me to something else. Ringo Starr is exceptionally underrated as both a drummer and a musician. Throughout all of these candid peeks into their creative process, anytime they're bringing in a new song or just starting to work on, here's something I've got, and they're starting to work on something, Ringo just comes right in. And just, he almost has the rhythm fully formed from the outset. It's just, he feels it in his bones, and he just dives right into the pocket in almost every case on all these jam sessions. And it's just like, wow, Ringo is like right there, and he's not playing over anybody. He's not trying to showboat or anything like that. He is playing to the song at all times. So it's just really cool to see Ringo. There was a time in the past, I grew up listening to heavier music and metal drummers and stuff, and when you're listening to people like Gene Hoglan or something from Death, or with the double bass and just crazy fills, and it's like, how do you rate Ringo, in context with everything that's come since, for drummers? And Ringo, for me, growing up, didn't really rate all that highly as a drummer, but now I'm really rethinking that, and Ringo is probably the reason that band lasted as long as it did, because he was the most chill person in the room. He was always laid back. He didn't try to get into any of the interpersonal stuff really, except to calm things down or to just facilitate communication. And he was always playful and always just, man, he was just chill, and he was just like somebody you would love to hang with. And I think Ringo he's always given off that vibe, but it really comes to the fore in this. But what really surprised me about Ringo was just the level of musicianship that gets taken for granted, because he was amazing in all these jam sessions. So this whole 9-hour series, it like I said, it follows about a month long span of time leading up to the rooftop concert, and they weren't even sure what they were going to do, if they were going to play somewhere else. There were several plans. One of them was for a TV show they were going to do, and then they had plans for like a TV series that kind of got scuttled, and then they were going to play in Tripoli at one point. Then that plan got scuttled because they weren't sure what they were going to do, if they were going to put people on. They were even going to do one where they went on a cruise ship, which really kind of foreshadowed the whole modern trend toward cruise ship shows and concerts, where everybody gets on a cruise ship and they have a concert on the ship, during a cruise. And the Beatles were like, I don't know if I want to be stuck on the ship, for however long it's going to take, without being able to go home. And that's the other thing too, you could tell that they were entering a phase in their lives where it was like each of them were wanting more and more to be homebodies. They just like and I think they also had developed a bit of stage fright and maybe agoraphobia, just from the level of fame that they had achieved, which I think that you would. I think anyone who is sane probably would, who's not like a megalomaniac, would want to get out of that limelight. As soon as you step into it, it's like, whoa, it's not anything I'm really into now. When we got people climbing over barricades and screaming their heads off to try to get to you. You know, that's a shocker. And I think it really most affected George. It seems like he wanted to kind of retreat into home life, a little bit perhaps more so than the others. You know, another thing while I'm thinking about it too, on that note, you know, a lot of people have this misconception, I believe, that John and Yoko, you know, they kind of became one person at a point, and she went everywhere with him, and they were always together, and that's what contributed to breaking up the Beatles or whatever. That's the lore or the mythology of it, and I don't think that that's true at all. After watching this, I think it kind of shows the opposite. I think it shows that it had nothing whatsoever to do with Yoko. I don't think Yoko was responsible for breaking up the Beatles. She was basically sitting there quiet for the most part through all of these clips. You know, she might nod along to what somebody is saying, but she wasn't interjecting herself into any of the band meetings. She was just kind of there, you know, supporting John. And I think she's gotten a bum rap as far as that goes. Now, as far as her singing, which does appear for like maybe a minute total out of this 9 hours. You know, every time it does happen, it happens just for a few seconds, and it's like, oh God, get her off that microphone, you know? Please stop. Please, somebody stop her. I think they actually recorded a couple of these things, and it was like the Yoko Ono freak out session or whatever, where they're kind of, you know, waiting for everybody to arrive, and it's just John and Yoko and maybe a couple other people. And they're just kind of jumping on instruments and screaming and beating and making noise, like you sometimes do. You know, again, those of you in bands, you'll recognize this kind of stuff. It's like before everybody's gotten there and you start getting down to serious business, you know, you kind of freak out on the instruments for a little bit or just do something else. You know, it's funny too. Because I see a lot of the frustration of Paul when he's trying to do something serious. You know, he's got this song, it's maybe nearly complete, or he's got like a couple of verses, and he wants to work on it with the band and see if his ideas or something, whatever he's hearing in his head, works in the band setting, and he's trying to get everybody to do that. So he'll start playing something and bouncing it off of everybody, but then John will make a joke of it, you know, and you can see Paul start to get frustrated with that. But then you can also see the gears working. He's processing. Well, if I voice my frustration with the way John is taking this right now, the creative process will grind to a halt, and that would just create ill feelings. And you can see all this happening in Paul's head, like as you watch this, and it's like I recognize some of myself in that, and it's almost a bit. It's almost scary, you know. As far as the Beatles. I'm probably more Paul than any of the rest of them, just because if I'm working on something, it tends to be a little bit more serious. Now there are times when you get jokey and stuff, but there are times too when you want it to be serious, and then everybody else is joking, and it's really frustrating. And again, that's something I think most people, if you have been in a band or tried to write songs with other people, you understand that dynamic and how that works out and how frustrating it can be. And how it's a balance, a give and take. And if you lose that give and take because, for whatever reason, if people have gone their separate ways, if they've developed a new group of friends that they're hanging with over here on the side, and they're no longer hanging with you all the time, then it becomes weirder and weirder when you try to get together and create a dynamic where songs will flow and creativity can happen. And I recognize so much in all of this. It's like like I said, it is a must watch if you're somebody who participates in a creative process at any point. And it's funny too, on the subject of Ringo. There's this one part in the series where Ringo sort of, again, it's one of these moments where not everybody is there yet, and they're just kind of waiting for everybody to arrive, and Ringo's like, oh, have you heard the Octopus song? And George is like, no, what are you talking about? So Ringo's like, he goes over to the piano and he starts, I'd like to be under the sea. And he doesn't have very much. He just has like the first couple of lines, right? And he kind of bangs it out on the piano, and it's sort of jokey, and everybody, the people who are there, who are very few, just sort of laugh at it, laugh it off. But this was interesting to me because all it takes sometimes is a little bit of encouragement to coax a song out of somebody who isn't used to writing a song like Ringo. So George gets his guitar and he's like, play that again, play what you were playing. So he goes over by the piano and you can see them sitting there together, and Ringo starts to play, again, and it comes to the part where we'd be so happy, you and me, the sort of breakdown, the turnaround before it comes back to the octopus's garden with you and resolves. George sort of helps him write all of that section on the guitar. And on the piano, he's like, see, it needs to go somewhere and then come back around and end right there like that. And Ringo's like, oh yeah, cool. But what's interesting about that is Ringo Starr gets the entire writing credit for that, where obviously, George Harrison was a co-writer on that song. And so many of these other songs, where Paul comes in with almost a fully formed idea, and he's obviously the sole writer, but it's Lennon McCartney on all of those tracks, where John had very limited, if any, input into some of that stuff, and vice versa. So I think more than anything else, that's what broke up the band. I really do. I think the fact that they didn't really share writing credits appropriately a lot of the times, where the other two members, George and Ringo, were just kind of an afterthought on some of that stuff. And I think by the end it had become obvious to everybody that these two important members were sort of being forgotten in the publishing royalties, probably, and writing credits and things like that. And by that point it wasn't fair. And George, he had all these hundreds of songs probably that he wanted to get out of his head, and he wanted to get onto tape somehow in a project, and he was just ready to do that and move on. And it's unfortunate that there wasn't enough time for all of these people to stay together and stay creative and stay at the top of their game, and for everybody to be able to shine equally like they deserved to. And it's also kind of interesting to see the dynamics of the Beatles between themselves. Like Paul and Ringo got along really well when it was just them two, and I think they all got along pretty well in this for the most part. It seemed like the most finicky person there was George. Like he was the one who had the biggest chip on his shoulder. I think he felt like he was. I think he felt like he had been left out of the loop, left behind, and sort of forgotten. A lot of his song ideas weren't taken seriously. I think his input into songs was. He was comparing himself a lot to other guitarists. Like he mentions, I can't play like Clapton. I can't do what Clapton does and have all these ideas that just flow and then make sense. And I can't do that, So he's comparing himself in his mind to other players who he obviously idolizes. And I think that's unhealthy, in large part. But, if you haven't seen the series, definitely check it out. It's on Disney Plus. Maybe you can find a way to pirate it. I'm not condoning that, but if you don't want to give your money to Evil Mickey, which I get, there are other ways of perhaps doing that. But it's worth a watch, even if you just subscribe for 1 month to that Disney Plus and just to watch that and then cancel. It's worth it just for that. So yeah, that's my review of the new Beatles documentary on Disney Plus. Definitely check it out. Let me know what you thought. If you've already seen it, tell me in the comments what you thought, and if you agree with some of my assessments. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say. Billy Preston, when he comes in, I wanted to talk about that. So Billy Preston is this keyboard player that joins them for these sessions. And before this, their ideas are starting to slow down. It's getting all sluggish. And they're just not balancing, they're not gelling really, with a lot of things. And then Billy Preston comes in, and as soon as he comes in, everybody just sort of perks up. We have this new energy, this new musician who's making everything just sort of fall into place naturally. Everything sort of starts to jam, and they're like, wow, that I'm feeling this. and you see a lot more heads bobbing and people getting into it, and it's like, that's exactly what we needed, was Billy Preston on those keys right there. And I agree. It's like, you can see it. It's night and day. You know, when they're trying to get something going, just the four of them, and then when he comes in, it's almost also like they're trying to impress him as much as he's trying to impress them. You know, they're trying to say, yeah, you know what, we are the Beatles, you know, and he's right to want to be here. You know, they're trying to step up their game when he's there, and it really shows. But you'll see all of this if you watch it, I think. And let me know what you think down below. If I'm way off on this assessment, if this is just, you know, if this is just a money grab or whatever. Whatever you think, I really don't care. But for my money, you know, it's this kind of content would be the only reason I would continue to pay for a Disney Plus subscribership, because, you know, most of the other stuff is, you know, a lot of it at least is just for kids. But this is the sort of thing that makes it worthwhile to subscribe for a month and just, if nothing else, watch just that. Definitely worth a watch. If it comes out on some kind of DVD format or whatever, I might consider buying it if it's not too expensive. But 9 hours of just complete immersion into Beatles lore. And I've had a lot of things challenged. Like I said, I don't think Yoko Ono had anything to do with the Beatles breaking up, from what I could see. You know, she was just sort of there, wasn't creating any tension in any of the sessions, or getting in or inserting herself or anything like that. You know, it's nothing like that you would assume just hearing all the rumors over the years about, you know, Yoko Ono being a force of negative energy in the Beatles. I don't see where that was necessarily true. If anything, I would say the chip that George had on his shoulder over not being allowed a bigger part of the songwriting process and credits and all of that was a bigger deal, and facilitated the breakup of the band. And it's just really sad, because it's more than apparent that at this time they're hitting their peak, man. It's like they peaked at the very end, as far as I'm concerned. You know, and it doesn't look like that. When you see 9 hours of footage, you see a lot of the starts and stops and the ebb and flow and all these dead end ideas leading nowhere. And, you know, people will start a jam and then sort of pop out of the jam and everything falls apart. And that happens all the time. And, you know, that's the honest part of it, though. If you want to show your complete, fully formed idea at the end in an album form and polished and gone, it's, you know, passed through George Martin's capable hands, you know, and all the mixing and everything and all the polish added on top. Yeah, you know, there's something to be said for that. That's great. You know, that's your final idea in its realized form. But seeing the process, to me, is way more valuable as a musician, because it shows me that I'm not alone. You're not alone. You know, the creative process is difficult. There are starts and stops. Nobody has ideas fully formed that come into the world, you know, with a polish on them. You have to work at these things, and you have to put in the hours, you know. And they were there every day, and they put in hours, and they got a product at the end that they were proud of. So I think that if nothing else, should inspire us to try to do that more often. So anyway, let me know what you think down below, and for now, we'll see y'all later.